Let me see. Peggy took the sheet in her hand and began its perusal, her eyes opening wide and wider as she read. "Honor is at stake," replied the Earl, his hand seeking his sword. The Lady Vivian uttered a cry of anguish and sank fainting into the arms of her attendant. "Why, how funny!" Peggy broke off in the midst of the thrilling narrative to ask a practical question. "Where did this come from?" "I guess an angel brought it," replied Dorothy after due reflection. "Oh, you goosey!" Peggy's laughter rang out blithely, and Mrs. Raymond upstairs overheard and drew a relieved sigh, for to have Peggy low-spirited produced much the same effect as when the sun goes under a cloud. "Where did you find the paper, dearie?" coaxed Peggy. "The wind blew it from somewhere, didn't it?" Dorothy shook her head with vehemence, causing extreme agitation among her frizzled locks. "No, it didn't blow from anywhere. It just camed." It was evident that little information could be extracted from this source, and Peggy fell back upon her own wits. "It's typewritten. There isn't anybody around here who has a typewriter, except Harry Rind, and he wouldn't be writing about earls and swords and things. I wonder." Peggy broke off and stared at the next house. The windows upstairs were open. It would be an easier matter for a sheet of paper, more enterprising than its associates, to take a little excursion into the outer world. At the same time, Peggy disliked the idea of facing Elaine again to inquire if the typewritten sheet was her property. If it happened to belong to someone else, the chances were that Elaine would be as uncompromisingly disagreeable as she had been the day before, and to be snubbed twice in 2 days was too much, even for Peggy. "I don't believe it's worth anything anyway," thought Peggy, glancing at the sheet in her hand. Lurid sentences caught her eye. The ladies in the narrative seemed to give to shrieking and fainting, while the gentlemen had a propensity for deadly combat. A sturdy strain of common sense in Peggy's makeup caused her lips to twitch over this cheap tragedy. "It sounds silly," was Peggy's final verdict. "I don't believe it's worth anything, but after all, it belongs to somebody, and whoever wrote it thinks it's nice, I suppose. And, well, at the worst, she can't do more than shut the door in my face." She marched down the yard, head up and shoulders back, in soldier fashion. Indeed, Peggy felt very much as if she were leading a charge. Like most popular people, Peggy shrank from discourtesy. She was so accustomed to being liked that any indication of unfriendliness came with the sense of shock. The girl who had refused one neighborly kindness in so unpleasant a fashion was not likely to have undergone a change of heart in a little over 24 hours. With a sense of bracing herself to face the worst, Peggy knocked at the kitchen door and stood waiting. Elaine herself answered the summons. The look which crossed her face seemed to say, "What, you here again?" But Peggy did not wait for her to put the ungracious sentiment into words. "I don't know whether this belongs to you or not," she said hastily, "but I thought perhaps it did, because hardly anybody on the terrace has a typewriter." She handed the sheet to Elaine and prepared to back away. But Elaine's formality had vanished with the understanding of Peggy's errand. "Page 6, she exclaimed in tones of dismay. "Oh, I wonder where the rest are. I didn't see but this one, but then I didn't really look. When I came out on the porch, my little niece had it in her hand. She said an angel brought it." "An angel?" Ellen forgot her anxiety for a moment and laughed outright. A little bubbling laugh which did wonders in advancing the acquaintance of the two. Then her thoughts reverted to the paper, which in Peggy's opinion she prized unduly. "They must have blown out of one of the upstairs windows," she exclaimed. "Perhaps only that one blew out. You look upstairs, and I'll see if there are any more scattered over the grass," Peggy suggested obligingly. As it happened, the search of both girls was successful. Elaine came downstairs, her hands full of sheets she had gathered from the floor, and out of the number only one proved to be missing. This one, numbered 4, Peggy had found winding itself about the trunk of a spindling young peach tree in the front yard. "Now let's count them again and be sure they're all here," Elaine said eagerly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, concluded Peggy. "That's all, isn't it?" "Yes, that's all. Oh, how lucky I am to find them." "Oh, isn't it splendid?" The door opened and a tall lady looked in. A white veil was tied over her gray hair, and she wore black gloves. In one hand she carried a feather duster, and the helpless air with which she handled this domestic implement caught Peggy's attention at once. The sight of Elaine and Peggy beaming at each other across the typewritten sheets seemed to startle the newcomer. She made a movement as if to draw back, halted irresolutely, and murmured something unintelligible. Elaine came to the rescue, blushing vividly, quite as if, Peggy said to herself, she had been caught doing something out of the way. "Mamma, this is a neighbor of ours. Miss... I don't know your name, do I?" She looked a little surprised at the discovery. "Peggy Raymond," said the owner of the name with promptness. "And this is my mother, Mrs. Marshall." The introduction completed, Elaine hastened to explain Peggy's presence, and the other girl could not free herself of the feeling that she found it necessary to excuse as well as to explain. "Just think, Mamma, one of these sheets flew out of the window, and she brought it back to me. Wasn't I fortunate? And wasn't she kind?" "We certainly are much indebted to Miss Raymond," Mrs. Marshall remarked with a stateliness which took Peggy's breath away. "I regret that it is necessary," she continued impressively, "to apologize for my appearance. After being accustomed to the supervision of a house full of servants throughout my married life, it is extremely humiliating to me to be discovered engaged in the work of a parlour-maid." Peggy could think of no suitable reply to this speech. She perceived that Mrs. Marshall was one of the people who, having come down in the world, persisted in flaunting in the face of their acquaintances recollections of their past grandeur. She said hastily that nobody ever called her Miss Raymond, and she wanted to be Peggy to her new neighbors as well as to the rest of the terrace. Then she excused herself on the ground that she must look after Dorothy, while Elaine followed her to the door to say again, "I'm so much obliged. I can't tell you how much I thank you." Dorothy was sitting on the porch steps, a subdued little figure. Her hair, crinkling tightly after its recent washing, stood out in all directions, giving it the appearance of a tuft of thistledown just ready to fly away. Peggy felt the fluffy golden crown thoughtfully. "Dry as the desert of Sahara, isn't it?" Dorothy compressed her lips and blinked. She strongly objected to being addressed, in language beyond her comprehension, perhaps because she always suspected the people who used these terms of trying to make fun of her. "As long as your hair is dry and your dress is clean, I've an idea, Dorothy darling. How would you like to go to the park and hunt up the girls? They'll have had luncheon before we get there, but there'll be a plenty left. There always is." "Aunt Peggy!" screamed Dorothy, climbing to her feet with undignified haste. "I like you better in butterscotch and better in pink tooth powder. Let's hurry." And hurry they did. And which of the two enjoyed the gaieties of the picnic more, the big girl or the little one, it would be hard to say. But underneath Peggy's lightness of heart and whole-souled participation in the afternoon's fun, a pleasant undercurrent of thought ran like a hidden stream. The consciousness that at last she had succeeded in establishing friendly relations with the girl next door. End of chapter 3.